Wake up.
Let's explore the concept of Abraxas, regardless of your personal beliefs. We need to confront the traditional understanding of power, where God is supreme, Satan is the adversary, and angels and demons are locked in battle. This framework is essentially a simplified, flawed view of reality, designed to keep people focused on a binary system of good versus evil. However, there's a crucial truth that's often overlooked. There's a higher authority above both God and the devil, and that power is Abraxas. You've been misled, not just about history and religion, but about the very nature of reality. Everything you believe about divine and diabolical forces and the concepts of good and evil is based on a manipulated framework crafted to keep you compliant, confused, and spiritually passive. Hidden within ancient texts, traditions, and moral distinctions lies a more ancient and powerful force that no one discusses, Abraxas. I'm not here to flatter you or guide you gently through this. I'm here to reveal that beneath every concept you've been taught to revere or fear, there exists a third force. This force operates beyond the confines of light and darkness and is unconcerned with your salvation or damnation. Abraxas is neither a deity to be worshipped nor a devil to be cursed. Instead, he is the creator of both. He has no interest in your morality and doesn't categorize reality into good or evil because he embodies both. He is the power that simultaneously creates and destroys. The Gnostics understood this deeply. They didn't perceive a universe divided by God and Satan, but recognized a single, all-encompassing power that contained both, Abraxas. He is not here to save or condemn you. His purpose is to sustain the ongoing conflict itself, as that is where true power resides, not in resolution or clarity, but in the inherent tension. Before dismissing this as mere mythology, consider that Abraxas represents what Carl Jung termed the union of opposites. Jung was fascinated by this idea, referring to Abraxas in his 7 sermons to the dead as the God above gods, a being who mocks both heaven and hell. Jung wasn't fabricating stories. He was exploring the core of the human psyche, the unifying paradox that holds everything together, and that paradox is Abraxas. Ancient mystery schools didn't worship gods in the modern sense. They studied fundamental forces. They understood that power isn't found in purity, but in the integration of opposing elements. This is why they revered Abraxas. He isn't merely a character in a cosmic drama. He is the drama. He is the hidden author who orchestrates the roles played by God and the devil. You were never meant to discover his name or question these profound truths. You were intended to align with one side, fight the other, and never look up to see who controls the entire spectacle. Every religion, every political system, and every divisive narrative you've encountered has been filtered through this unseen lens of opposition. Abraxas is the hidden axis around which everything revolves. He doesn't seek your worship or demand your loyalty. He operates beyond the need for your belief, as belief is for confined systems, and Abraxas has no such limits. He is the raw, unfiltered essence of reality, existing at the very core of being where logic falters and distinctions dissolve. You cannot categorize him as divine or monstrous, for he embodies both. This is the truth that terrifies your gods and religions, the force they try to eradicate because it shatters the illusion of good versus evil. It reveals the terrifying yet liberating truth that everything is interconnected through him, and nothing, not God, not Satan, not even your own thoughts, is beyond his reach. Abraxas doesn't communicate through whispers or screams. He simply is, always present, hidden in plain sight. You won't find the name Abraxas in mainstream religious teachings or Sunday school lessons because it has been intentionally suppressed, filtered out, and removed from the narratives you've been taught. Why? Because Abraxas dismantles the entire system, and I'm not just referring to theology. I'm talking about the framework that dictates how you perceive reality, how you define right and wrong, who you should fear, and to whom you should submit. The fact that you've likely never heard his name before isn't due to his insignificance. It's because he poses a threat to those in control. When ancient mystery schools and early Gnostic movements began to uncover the true power dynamics of existence, they didn't start with conventional deities like Yahweh or Satan. They traced the power structure beyond them, leading them directly to something so disruptive and uncontrollable that it couldn't be absorbed into established doctrines. It had to be eradicated the moment it was named Abraxas. The backlash was immediate. The name Abraxas couldn't be integrated into the dualistic control structure the church was constructing. You cannot enforce obedience around a deity who transcends rules, nor can you maintain a system around a force that refuses to play the game. This name, Abraxas, wasn't some obscure poetic invention. It was historically significant, found carved into amulets, engraved on magical stones, used in rituals, and encoded within esoteric systems for centuries. We are discussing tangible historical evidence, not mere metaphors. Why would a name supposedly devoid of meaning appear in Gnostic scriptures, alchemical texts, magical grimoires, and even on artifacts ranging from ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire? This is no coincidence. It is a consistently suppressed truth, which should be a significant indicator. The ancient world's elite were not idly etching meaningless names into sacred tools. They were invoking something profoundly real, something they both respected and feared. Another glaring red flag is the systematic way Christian orthodoxy erased Abraxas from discourse. Anything associated with him was labeled heresy, texts mentioning him were condemned, and those who spoke his name aloud were executed. Yet, he never truly vanished. He continued to resurface, not because people sought to be provocative, but because those who delved deep enough discovered a recurring pattern. Every time you trace the path of power upwards, past angels, past archons, past the gods themselves, you inevitably encounter him. And no, this is not about worship. Make no mistake, Abraxas was never part of a religious cult in the traditional sense. There was no rigid doctrine, no set of rules, no savior narrative associated with him. What we are discussing is raw influence, a presence that ancient philosophers and occultists recognized as the true, underlying power. They didn't attempt to assign moral judgments to it. Instead, they sought to understand it. And every time they came close to unraveling its nature, they were silenced. The persistent pattern of erasing Abraxas from knowledge is not coincidental. It is a deliberate cover-up. This is because a force that takes no sides, that is both creator and destroyer, cannot be weaponized. It cannot be marketed to the masses or simplified into a good versus evil propaganda. It stands in direct opposition to every system designed to manipulate your perception. Most people fail to grasp how fragile the conventional idea of creation truly is. The sanitized version we've been fed is overly neat, simplistic, and convenient. God creates the world, evil enters, grand drama ensues, and that's the end of the story. However, when you delve into ancient Gnostic texts and study the frameworks that predate organized religion, you discover that the so-called creation story isn't divine. It's a hijacking, a cosmic malfunction. Abraxas is not part of this malfunction. He exists outside of it. In texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Trimorphic Protonoia, creation is not depicted as a sacred act of perfection. It's more akin to an accident, a fragmentation of divine intelligence, which the Gnostics called the pleroma. This totality was never meant to be fractured, but a rogue entity, Yaldabaoth, the false creator, shattered that unity, and from that rupture, the material world was formed. This is the true origin of the physical universe, not a paradise, but a defect. Here's where Abraxas enters the narrative, not as a component of the flawed system, but as a force originating from the primordial whole. He is not a consequence of the fall. He predates the conflict itself. He is not confined within the system of demiurges and corrupted archons. He transcends it. This is why he doesn't conform to the neat categories of good, evil, savior, or destroyer, because he never emerged from the fragmentation. He comes from the place that remained unbroken. If you want to talk about levels of power, forget deities who punish or reward, and forget demons who tempt or torment. Abraxas operates on a level where such distinctions are irrelevant. He isn't attempting to mend the broken system. He isn't acting as a cleanup crew for a world that was never meant to be this way in the first place. He exists in a state of complete, unadulterated totality, a form of existence that doesn't need to be understood, only acknowledged. This is where most people disengage because it shatters their established framework. If you are conditioned to view reality as a battle between two opposing sides, you cannot comprehend a third force that is not at war at all. This is what makes Abraxas so alien to us. He neither rebels nor obeys, and he doesn't even interfere. He is the original, uncorrupted signal, and that terrifies people who require everything to fit neatly into a system. This is why you won't find a clear-cut myth about Abraxas. He lacks a beginning or a discernible motive. The Gnostics didn't describe him as part of a timeline. They presented him as a state of being. You cannot assign him to a specific moment because he exists outside of time. You cannot define his nature because he precedes nature itself. This is why even the most advanced esoteric systems merely hinted at him. They could not translate him into language without corrupting the fundamental concept. Consider the structure of ancient cosmologies. The demiurge holds dominion over materia. However, the Gnostics were aware of even greater powers that remained beyond their grasp, realities that predated the cosmic fracture. This is the domain of Abraxas, not a creator, not a destroyer, but a remnant of the unfractured source, entirely whole and independent. The irony is that you've likely sought him in the wrong places, attempting to compare him to other deities or force him into a narrative that was never designed for him. He is not a product of the ensuing chaos. His essence preceded it and still contains the blueprint for the reality that existed before everything fragmented. Let's discuss the symbolism surrounding Abraxas, as this is where his true significance becomes apparent. When people hear the name Abraxas, they often dismiss it as an obscure, forgotten term from an old book. Yet, they are unaware of how deeply this figure is embedded in ancient symbolism. I'm not referring to an isolated carving on a temple wall, but rather an entire system of esoteric iconography built around him. These symbols appear on amulets, coins, and magical artifacts across diverse empires, cultures, and historical periods. Once you understand what to look for, you'll recognize a consistent pattern, a figure that defies complete explanation, depicted in ways that don't fit into any conventional religious structure. Abraxas is almost always portrayed with a rooster's head, a man's torso, and serpent legs. This unique composite design alone signifies that he is not a typical archetype, as it breaks established rules. The rooster, man, and serpent each hold radically different meanings in occult systems. The rooster symbolizes awakening, time, and vigilance. The man's torso represents consciousness, human agency, and the capacity for action. The serpent legs signify knowledge, movement, and transformation, the kind that transcends conventional morality. When combined, these elements depict a being that is not merely beyond duality, but beyond all categorization. It is neither a god nor a demon. It is a profound signal. What's truly astonishing is the consistent appearance of this figure on ancient talismans and magical gems. We're talking about tangible artifacts, physical objects from the Roman period, Egyptian syncretic rituals, and even some early Christian-adjacent sects who attempted to incorporate this into their mysticism before being suppressed by Orthodox authorities. These weren't mere decorations, they were tools. People carried these symbols because they believed Abraxas possessed power, not theoretical power, but real, practical, metaphysical leverage over reality. You wouldn't engrave such a symbol onto your shield or ring unless you believed it held genuine efficacy. Furthermore, let's not overlook the numerical significance, as this is crucial. The name Abraxas, when written in Greek letters, numerically adds up to 365. This is not a random coincidence, it is direct coding. In ancient esoteric systems, that number represented the totality of cosmic emanations, or the heavens controlled by the archons. So what does it signify when a single name embodies all 365? It means this figure is not merely operating within the cosmic structure, it contains the structure. This denotes control, not worship or obedience, but mastery. You know who else recognized this? The ancient magicians and Hermetic philosophers. These were not ignorant individuals, they were some of the most advanced thinkers of their era. When they incorporated the image of Abraxas into their grimoires and sigils, they weren't simply invoking another deity. They were invoking the interface between opposing forces. That's what the image represents, not just a hybrid creature, but the literal compression of contradiction into a single symbol. Furthermore, let's not overlook the numerical significance, as this is crucial. The name Abraxas, when written in Greek letters, numerically adds up to 365. This is not a random coincidence, it is direct coding. In ancient esoteric systems, that number represented the totality of cosmic emanations, or the heavens controlled by the archons. So what does it signify when a single name embodies all 365? It means this figure is not merely operating within the cosmic structure, it contains the structure. This denotes control, not worship or obedience, but mastery. You know who else recognized this? The ancient magicians and Hermetic philosophers. These were not ignorant individuals. They were some of the most advanced thinkers of their era. When they incorporated the image of Abraxas into their grimoires and sigils, they weren't simply invoking another deity. They were invoking the interface between opposing forces. That's what the image represents, not just a hybrid creature, but the literal compression of contradiction into a single symbol. Consider what Carl Jung, a highly respected 20th century thinker, actually wrote. He didn't just mention Abraxas, he extensively discussed him. In his 7 Sermons to the Dead, Jung describes Abraxas as the god who encompasses both the Christian God and the devil. He referred to Abraxas as a power beyond morality, beyond opposites, and beyond judgment. Jung, the architect of modern psychology, would not have introduced this name lightly. He delved into the profound unconscious, exploring what he termed archetypes, primordial forces that shape human behavior. He discovered that the concepts of an entirely good God and an entirely evil devil did not fully account for the vast spectrum of human experience. It was a superficial, overly rigid balance. Reality, he found, is far more complex. And at the heart of that complexity, he found Abraxas, not as a mere myth, but as a symbolic representation of totality, the force that doesn't resolve contradictions but embodies them. This understanding shatters everything, because once you accept that Abraxas contains both God and the devil, the entire framework of judgment collapses. There is no moral high ground, no side to be taken. Instead, you experience a profound leap in awareness, a model where power is not divided but compressed. This kind of compression is explosive, even nuclear. Religions inherently dislike this notion. If God and Satan are merely components of a larger system, their absolute authority diminishes. Their functions, their roles, and whoever sits above them, the system administrator, the root force, become the true focus. That is Abraxas. And this is not something taught in seminaries. Abraxas doesn't fit conventional molds because he isn't a personal god or a character. He is the very architecture of contradiction, the formula that allows both benevolence and horror to coexist, not as opposing forces, but as complementary processes. You don't worship such a force. You simply strive to survive it. The challenge is that most people cannot grasp this. They desire a clear villain, a savior, a narrative where good triumphs and evil is defeated. However, that narrative crumbles under scrutiny. It collapses the moment you view the system from a top-down perspective, from which everything appears as a unified whole. Abraxas is indifferent to who wins. He takes no sides. He created the game board, the pieces, and the illusion of conflict. This isn't just ancient mythology. It's a direct challenge to the most fundamental assumptions people live by. If you spent your life believing you're choosing between good and evil, what happens when you realize that the choice itself is a trap? That the entire setup was designed to make you believe you had freedom, when in reality you were merely oscillating between poles within a system you didn't even know existed. There's a reason you've never heard of the cult of Abraxas, and it's not because it didn't exist. It's because it was intentionally erased. These were not eccentric individuals engaging in obscure rituals. They were initiates, people who had pierced through the illusion, understanding that the battle between good and evil was engineered, not an eternal truth. They weren't striving for heaven or fearing hell. They were attempting to connect with the entity that transcended both, and that made them a threat. The early groups that venerated Abraxas weren't recruiting, building temples, or seeking converts. They operated covertly because they had no other choice. If you started proclaiming that the God of the Bible and the devil were merely parts of the same cosmic mechanism, you wouldn't engage in a debate. You would face persecution, even death. You would be systematically erased from historical records. This is precisely what transpired. These groups, let's call them proto-Gnostics, rogue mystics, or philosophical insurgents, ventured too close to the core engine of reality and paid the ultimate price. For evidence, examine the surviving fragments. The Pistis Sophia, the books of Zhe, the scattered codices found buried in jars and hidden in caves for centuries. These texts are not mere theological reflections, they are encoded manuals. They describe layered realms, cosmic administrators, false creators, and a singular, superior intelligence that sustains everything. This isn't religion, it's architecture. And the individuals who grasped this weren't praying, they were decoding. The ritual practices associated with Abraxas were not designed for worship. That's not how he operates. Instead, they aim to align with him, to synchronize the human psyche with the fundamental contradictions of reality. This is why their ceremonies appeared chaotic, even blasphemous, to outsiders. Because they honored neither order nor disorder exclusively, they engaged with both. They invoked light and darkness simultaneously. The core principle is this: you cannot access Abraxas by choosing sides. You access him by confronting the entire system at once. Do you think this was well received by the power structures of the time? Absolutely not. The early church fathers weren't just irritated by the Gnostics. They were obsessed with their destruction. They didn't simply disagree. They enacted a scorched earth policy because these teachings weren't merely heretical, they were system-breaking. If people began to believe that the god they feared was part of a larger control grid, it was game over. The fear-based economy would collapse, and the authority model would disintegrate. This wasn't solely a spiritual threat, it was also political. Because if you can convince people that all power structures, divine, royal, moral, are part of a false dichotomy, you dismantle the tools of control. The cults of Abraxas understood this. That's why they didn't preach from pulpits, they operated in the shadows. They transmitted knowledge through symbols, codes, and direct experience, not through rigid dogma. They weren't concerned with mere belief, their focus was on profound awareness. In ancient Gnostic and Hermetic traditions, names were not just labels, they were equations, codes. The name Abraxas, when written in Greek, numerologically adds up to 365. This is no coincidence. This is the exact number of heavens or cosmic spheres in many ancient cosmologies, each ruled by an archonic intelligence, and each designed to confine human consciousness within a cycle of ignorance. That number signifies total coverage. You don't arrive at 365 by accident. You don't use it unless you are attempting to assert control over the entire structure. This is why the name Abraxas was used as a mantra, not a prayer, not a plea, but a command in rituals. It wasn't recited for comfort. It was deployed to pierce through layers of spiritual interference. Ancient magicians, particularly within Egyptian Greek syncretic systems, used the name to access what they believed were points of origin, places where the boundary between human consciousness and cosmic architecture was most permeable. Abraxas was not a deity they bowed to. He was a frequency they tapped into. Do you consider modern spirituality advanced? These ancient practitioners were assigning planetary forces to the letters of a name. Each of the 7 Greek letters in Abraxas was directly linked to one of the 7 classical celestial bodies: the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. This isn't mere poetic imagery. It represents a complete planetary alignment, a metaphysical circuit. Each letter wasn't merely symbolic, it was operational. The name was engineered to mirror the structure of the cosmos, providing the practitioner with access to it. Such profound power isn't embedded in a word unless it's part of a system designed for its utilization. This was an operational system for manipulating reality, not based on faith, but on mechanical principles. Uttering the name, with proper understanding, yielded results. This knowledge was exclusive, reserved for initiates who had undergone a rigorous decoding process, shedding all illusions of duality and preparing themselves to engage with raw, unfiltered power. This is precisely why the church relentlessly pursued it. It wasn't just heresy, it was weaponized knowledge, the kind that could allow someone to bypass priesthoods, dogma, and even fear entirely. If you can access the divine structure directly, there's no need for intermediaries or permission, you simply act. That is profoundly dangerous and shatters existing systems. Abraxas served as the passcode. And let me be clear, this wasn't some obscure secret hidden in a desert cave. The use of the name was widespread. You can find magical papyri, amulets, and stone carvings all inscribed with the same letters. These weren't decorative items, they were encrypted tools. People wore them, used them, and chanted them not for comfort, but to overcome barriers. That's what ancient practitioners believed Abraxas offered, not guidance or forgiveness, but direct access. If you truly want to understand the depth of this concept, consider who preserved the knowledge of Abraxas, not in temples or churches, but in the coded traditions of secret societies, occult lodges, and esoteric circles that never ceased studying the underlying structure of reality. I'm referring to individuals who were indifferent to being liked, accepted, or validated by mainstream religion. Their obsession lay in understanding systems, how power genuinely flows, how consciousness is manipulated, and how reality is constructed. They did not disregard Abraxas. Instead, they placed him at the core of their models. In alchemical texts from the Middle Ages, you'll discover traces, strange diagrams, layered symbols, and encrypted references that point not to the God of Scripture, but to a force that contains all polarities. These were not disposable symbols, they were blueprints. In traditions like Rosicrucianism and later in groups such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, there's a consistent theme. Beneath the dualistic facade, there lies something unifying, something untouchable by doctrine. That is what they pursued. They weren't seeking moral superiority, they were seeking the source code. Abraxas became a kind of hidden constant, unspoken in public but embedded in the private language of the initiated. His image, his number, his sigil, these appear in documents never intended for mass consumption. This is not accidental. You don't include such a signal in a closed system unless it holds significant meaning for those at the top. And no, this doesn't imply that every secret society worshipped Abraxas. That's not the point. The point is, they knew. They understood the logic of a force that simultaneously held destruction and creation, cruelty and compassion, truth and deception. This is the same logic found in high-level occult practice, rituals designed not to affirm the ego, but to obliterate it. To bring the practitioner face to face with something so far beyond moral comprehension that it completely reconfigures their perception. And it's no coincidence that these rituals often involve confronting opposites, invoking contradictions, and breaking mental binaries. This is because Abraxas is not a god of answers, but a force of dismantling everything false you've been taught to believe about what is holy, what is evil, and what is real. What remains is the raw structure, the scaffolding. No angels, no devils, no comforting narrative. Just the fundamental element that makes the entire existence possible in the first place. That's why Abraxas didn't survive in popular religion. He couldn't. His mere presence destabilizes the myth, causing the story to collapse in on itself. He forces you to realize it's all a theatrical production, necessary, perhaps, but still a construct. So, if you followed this far, you're not here by chance. You're already someone who dares to ask the questions most people are too afraid to ask. You already sense the flaws in the system, and you're tired of pretending they don't exist. This doesn't mean you have all the answers, but it signifies your readiness to look behind the curtain. And once you truly see it, Abraxas isn't just a word. He becomes the moment the illusion shatters. When opposites merge. When the underlying structure reveals itself. This entire conversation has been leading to that very point. Thank you for staying until the end. If this deep dive into Abraxas shattered some of your assumptions, then you're on the path of true inquiry. Help us continue to unravel these hidden truths and challenge conventional narratives. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next exploration. And in the comments below, tell us, what other suppressed truths are you ready to confront?